Hello, my name is John Bear Mitchell. I'm the coordinator for the Native American Waiver and Educational Program here at the University of Maine, and I want to welcome you to the 26th Wabanaki Winter Market. Today's program is going to feature artist demonstrations, storytelling, and music. You can purchase one-of-a-kind art by visiting the Hudson Museum's website and clicking on the artist profile. We thank you for supporting artists during this time of the pandemic.
The University of Maine is located on Marsh Island, the ancestral homeland of the Penobscot Nation, where issues of water and territorial rights and encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing. Penobscot homeland is connected to the other Wabanaki tribal nations, the Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Micmac, through kinship, alliances, and diplomacy. The university also recognizes that the Penobscot Nation and the other Wabanaki tribal nations are distinct, sovereign, legal, and political entities with their own powers of self-governance and self-determination. As part of this land acknowledgement, and to create a fuller and more accurate awareness of place, the Penobscot Language Signage Committee created signs that identify UMaine campus buildings and roads in both Penobscot and English. Today, we come together for the 26th Annual Wabanaki Winter Market at the Hudson Museum in the Collins Center for the Arts, Center of the Wigwam. Since 1995, the Hudson Museum and the Maine Indian Basketmakers Alliance have hosted this holiday event, which last year was renamed the Wabanaki Winter Market. It features demonstrations, performances, music, and storytelling, as well as opportunities to acquire one-of-a-kind artwork created by Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Micmac, and Maliseet artists and invited guests. This event complements ongoing university research projects by faculty, staff, and graduate students, and it highlights Wabanaki students at UMaine and the University of Maine at Machias. Many of these research projects, conducted by Wabanaki faculty and students, support preservation, protection, and access to natural resources used to make the beautiful pieces of art that you will see today. The university has forged a unique partnership with Native American communities in Maine and engages stakeholders to seek sustainable solutions to issues that are crucial to the future of basket making. Basket makers and artists are discussing threats to the ash supply from the emerald ash borer, and UMaine researchers and members of state and federal agencies are working together in a collaborative way that honors Indigenous knowledge. The university is deeply committed to Wabanaki students. UMaine has the largest population of Native students, 152, pursuing higher education in Maine, as well as the largest number of Native American alumni in Maine. This year's market will be celebrated virtually. Please join us for artist interviews, music, storytelling, and demonstrations brought to you via YouTube. And please visit the virtual directory of Wabanaki artists on the Hudson Museum's website to contact artists directly to acquire baskets, birchbark work, jewelry, and other art forms.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kirk Francis, and I proudly serve as Chief of the Penobscot Indian Nation. It's my honor to welcome you all today to the virtual Wabanaki Winter Market. For 26 years now, nothing has been able to cancel this event, and I've had the honor of doing this several times. I typically would welcome you to Penobscot territory, but we all know this year is a little bit different. I still would like to offer that welcome and let you know that you are honored guests, and we appreciate your support in all that you do for these amazing and very talented artists. I would just like to take a minute to acknowledge a few things. As everyone knows, this has been a very challenging time, and the Maine Indian Basketmakers Association has not been immune from that. I want to first recognize the significant loss of MIBA President Molly Neptune Parker. This loss was huge for all the Wabanaki communities. She was a tremendous mentor to all the artists you'll be meeting, but also prioritized culture, community, and her family. And again, was a tremendous loss. I was lucky to know her, and she will be sadly missed. I'd also like to take a second to acknowledge and pay respects to people that have made this event happen. We have a tremendous ally in the University of Maine and the Hudson Museum, and would like to mention Gretchen Faulkner personally for her contributions and her effort in partnership with the tribes of Maine. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Jennifer Neptune for all her hard work in keeping culture and Native arts at the top of her priority list for the benefit of all of our communities. So thank you, Jennifer, for that work. This has been a particularly hard year for our artists. With the pandemic, almost all the markets and museum shops have either been canceled, gone virtual, or closed during this time. It's been extremely devastating in terms of the economic impact to our artists and their families. Your support is more important today than it ever has been. Through your support, these extremely talented Wabanaki artists, who I believe are some of the best in the world at their crafts, can continue to do what they do. And it is important to know that what they do is not just make things. It is much more important role they have. They keep our cultures alive by what they do in very much the same way our ancestors did. They are also teachers and mentors for future generations, providing skills and knowledge for our youth to pass on. They are ambassadors for our Wabanaki nations as they travel all across the country, representing our communities, doing that proudly and with excellence. So this event and these amazing people are about much more than pieces of art. These items are made with a lot of work and pride, with techniques that are ancient. They are ambassadors for our Wabanaki nations as they travel all over the country, representing our communities proudly and with excellence. So this is an event, and these amazing people are about much more than pieces of art. These items are made with a lot of work and pride with ancient techniques. Being fortunate enough to have a product from these artists is an honor and really becomes immediately a one-of-a-kind piece of history. So I understand that the work you do is important in so many ways, and also know this has been a tough time for you. And I appreciate your strength, perseverance, and creativity in fighting through this time for the benefit of us all. Obviously, I cannot thank everyone in these few minutes that I have, but I am proud to be part of this event in a time when we're looking for some means of normalcy. It's important for us to socialize and have that sense of normalcy in these times. So today is also about much more than simply shopping. It's about seeing old friends, connecting with new ones, and being with our relatives of all the Wabanaki nations. So thank you to everyone who made this happen. And on behalf of the Penobscot Nation, our Vice Chief, Ambassador, Council, and people, welcome again to Penobscot territory. Have a safe and happy holiday, and we wish you and your families the best of health during this time.
I'm Jennifer Neptune, and on behalf of the Maine Indian Basketmakers Alliance, I'd like to welcome you to the Wabanaki Winter Market. This is our 26th year, and in all of the years that we've held this market, we've never had to cancel it. We've had ice, we've had snow, we've had rain, we've had every weather condition that Mother Nature could throw at us, and we've always the market has gone on. This year is different with COVID, and we'd hope to hold it in person, but obviously that can't happen this year. So this is the next best thing that we can do. This is an important market to all the artists that look forward to this every year. It helps our communities, it helps our families, and we hope that you'll take the time to go to the artist directory on the Hudson Museum webpage after watching this and look for some of the contact information of the artists and contact them directly. You can buy directly from them this year, and I'm sure many of them would be happy to tell you what they have available and email you photos and work with you to help you get baskets or artwork for gifts or for yourself. So very recently, the Passamaquoddy community at Indian Township lost a very special woman, Joan Dana. Many of you would recognize her from the Maine Indian Basketmakers Alliance shows. She was often there singing and dancing and selling her work. She did basketry, she did quill work. She was a very, very special person and meant so much to a lot of people. She was one of the kindest and humblest people that I knew. Very, very lucky to have her with us as long as she was, but she will be missed. Many years ago, the Hudson Museum and the Maine Indian Basketmakers Alliance worked together to do videos of the artists. One of those videos was of Molly Neptune Parker. Molly was our long-term president of the Maine Indian Basketmakers Alliance and worked so hard to ensure that this tradition survived. She was an award-winning basket maker, won numerous awards for her work, and was a National Heritage Award winner. She inspired so many people and taught so many people. She taught basket making in all of our communities at our community workshops. She was always there to give advice, to encourage. When things seemed bleak, she would be the first one to, point out the way to get through it and to give us strength and courage to keep on going. Molly passed away early this spring, and so we wanted to show her video to honor her.
I actually enjoy making baskets. And it doesn't have to be any particular basket as long as it's a basket. I was born and raised here on Indian Township, and I lived for a while at Pleasant Point. I started with scraps. My mother and I never allowed us to touch the good material. Well, I was the only one that was interested in basket making. So she says, once you get to learn how to make baskets, then you can touch the good stuff. She says, but in the meantime, use the scraps that you can find off, on the floor. So that's how I started. And I was doing like little candy baskets and stuff like that. When my mother realized that I really had an interest in it, then she started sharing her good materials. All the people that I remember that I picked up different things from were all beautiful people, and they were all elders. People that I associated with ever since I was a child. My mother loved to make the flower top baskets, the ones that I make all the time. She gave me all her forms shortly before she passed, and there is 2 baskets with flowers that she always made. And as far as I can remember, she was the only one that made baskets like that. And also strawberries. We make the old-fashioned strawberries, which is shaped different than most of the other people that do make strawberries. And her other favorite type that she used to make is a handkerchief basket, which George made here. And it's basically the same thing, but she made hers a different style. You see, I lost my mom 2 years ago. And she and I used to sit down to make baskets all the time. And at that time, we spoke Indian fluently. And now, very seldom you find anybody that speaks Passamaquoddy language. And it's so nice to hear people talk, to converse with, you know, at different times and different places. I used to work for my mother-in-law, Frances Richards. She made pie baskets, and she also had men working in her workshop to do the scale baskets. And between my husband, myself, and at least 4 or 5 other people, we usually have 100 baskets from Monday morning to early Saturday morning. And everybody shared whatever they had, whether it's food, basket making, braiding, whatever. It's still, you know, we were welcome to do whatever we wanted to do with our neighbors. And that was the best part of it. I've already split some with my splitter, and now I'm gauging it out to different pieces. And I will do this until I can get all my materials ready, but it takes a long time to do this. And I'm trying to get it all ready so it won't waste on me. So I'm gauging it out in different sizes. Now this particular piece is 1/8 of an inch that I use for weavers. And I'll get a whole bunch of them. Then I use this one here, which is 3/16. I use them for the curly baskets. And then I use the very tiny weaves, which I don't know what size this is, but it's smaller than the 1/8. So I'm doing all different sizes. This is a weaver strip, and it won't be one of the real tiny weavers. It'll be the 1/8 because it's a little bit on the thick side, but not thick enough to use for standards. I separate every size so I can have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different sizes that I'm doing at the same time. So right now I'm getting materials ready for my next workshop. And I'll have some people braiding, some people trying to, you know, split ash, and other people already started to make baskets. So we have different phases on different workshops that we have. I will teach as many people as possible as long as they want to learn. That means, you know, the tribal members. At one point I thought we were going to lose it because I can actually count how many people made baskets here. There was only about half a dozen of us. That's included some of the elders that were alive at that time. And now I think that you're going to find more and more kids that are interested.
I started doing it because it was something that my grandmother did, and I kept doing it because it was something I enjoyed doing. And now I keep doing it because I realize it's a really important cultural aspect of this tribe.
Everyone that's there wants to be there. They want to learn how to start a basket. They said they've learned how to weave around a basket, but never actually taught the first stages of it, which is making the bottom part of the basket. So we did all that this week, and I think maybe not every one of them will take it up as they get older, but I think if we continue teaching the children the importance of basket making, you're going to find it's going to survive.
I'm happy to introduce Gabe Frey, a Passamaquoddy basket maker. In fact, he's an award-winning basket maker. He's one of the few basket makers that actually harvest the tree and process it to completion of a basket.
I'm Gabriel Frey, Passamaquoddy basket maker from Zibaig and Micmac. I grew up in both communities. I learned how to make baskets from my grandfather when I was around 18. And he was primarily a utility basket maker, sort of like these pack baskets. I did that solely utility baskets for quite a few years, and eventually started refining the process of the utility basket, trying to echo the aesthetics of the fancy baskets within a sort of like usable piece of art. Eventually made the same pack basket, but 1/8 its original size. And then from that process started adding leather work and things. So most of the purses that I make now have a leather lid on them and a leather liner. And eventually, so I, for a long time, only went with natural materials, no color. Eventually started incorporating natural dyes to create sort of a different look as well. They're all designed still to be utility baskets, so everything about them, the function is first. It has the runners on the bottom, just like the larger baskets. While there is a sort of like luxury feel to having the leather liner, it is still part of the utility. It sort of strengthens everything about the basket. But yeah, so that's what I'm doing now. The style has slowly changed over time, but still primarily utility. So this is black ash, Fractionus nigra, and I am beating the tree to separate the growth rings. So this is a ring porous tree, so you basically have to pound every single square inch of the tree, and it fractures the cadmium layer between the growth rings. And this is all to get the raw material to start making baskets. It's an incredibly labor-intensive process. And so this is just the beginning process of gathering the raw material. So for the purposes of the video, I'm only going to be pounding a strip and enough to process to then incorporate into a basket. But normally I would be pounding the entire log and then starting to remove material. This is just to make it a little faster. So after you've done an entire strip, you can then begin to remove the growth rings, and they generally will separate off the tree the width of the axe head that was used to pound them. And if there are any pin knots or disruptions in the fiber, that will come through along with the fibers that you're removing. So it kind of almost makes the fiber stick a little bit. And that is the raw material. Next, I'm going to be shaving off these loose fibers and then splitting it down and then gauging it to get basket weaving material. So this is the material that I just got off the tree outside. And after we've harvested the tree, and then processed it, this is just the raw splints, so literally 1 year's growth. And there are a lot of different things that make a tree a basket quality tree. This particular tree has fairly thin growth rings in terms of what I would most often use. I generally prefer it a little bit on the thicker side, but it is still good material and can split relatively easily. So right now, I'm just cleaning up the edges. And then the shaving process literally just planes off the fibers that were pounded that were fractured in the pounding process. So that's the fast growth of the tree. And black ash is a ring porous tree, so it's basically delineated into fast and slow growth. And that's any ring porous tree, but black ash is unique in that that delineation is so stark that those fast growth fibers is what allows the tree to be separated in the way it is. It's actually like this fiber that's has such amount of space in it that you can actually just pound the tree and then remove it. And then the other material, the slow growth, is so dense that you have this extremely durable material from that. And this tool is called a Beadworker. It's a standard A-frame that this basically just serves to hold the ash in place, and then just by cutting into very, very slightly that 1 year's growth ring, you can actually peel that in half. And while the tree separates along the growth ring when you're pounding it, there's no fibrous delineation for splitting. So the only thing that makes this split evenly or not is the amount of pressure that you put on it. And there's a couple of knots there that kind of took the fiber a little bit. So any fine basket, any fancy basket, this process has to be done to get that fancy basket material. So this is what's called a double split. So both sides of this are from the inside of that growth ring. And it's still an incredibly strong material even after you've done that. The next step in the process, and this is all speeded up quite a lot. Generally we'd be doing the entire tree all at once. So like all the pounding, all the splitting, all the shaving. So that there's not like steps in the process that are skipped. So then once you have all of your split material, the gauge is basically a tool that has blades set a specific width apart. This is a 3/16 gauge. And so you get a standard uniform weaver. Now this gauge is cutting, but first and foremost what it's doing is it's guiding along the fibers this way. Every step in the process in basket making is designed to utilize the strength of the tree that's inherently there in the fibers. So when we pound the tree, we're taking it off the tree in the way that it grew. When you split it, you're going along those natural fibers. Even though it's not a sharp delineation, you're still splitting along the fibers to keep the strength as long as you can. And then the same thing with the gauging. Because this process has been done this way, these little strips that you end up getting are incredibly strong and durable. And that is the beginning of basket making. Usually the easiest part is actually weaving the basket. This is a particularly unique basket because, well, it's all the natural dyes, but there are a lot more sort of cool tones in this basket. Generally, there's like a wide range, but most of these have been soaked in a iron mordant first, which in dyeing terms, they say it saddens the color. It basically just turns it into a cool tone. So even these like reds and maroons become sort of like sort of turned down a little bit. They're not as bright and vibrant. And that was just to sort of get a much more sort of like subdued tone throughout. So there's iron with logwood, and then actual just logwood with a alum acetate, madder root with iron, and then madder root going up through just with an aluminum, and then it gets into, it's either Osage or weld, and then over dyeing the Osage with a indigo creates that green into the sort of like aqua blue colors. Yeah, it's been a process trying to figure out a way of blending the colors and like sort of creating a more smooth transition. So a lot of it has to do with like over dyeing or combining colors to sort of like create a more subtle transition between them. This one is just indigo and then with a madder root standards. So it creates that stark transition between the colors, complementary colors. But for the most part, for a long time, I didn't use any dyes because of that sort of like trying to make the material as pure as possible. Once I discovered how vibrant natural dyes can be on ash, it's really fun to sort of explore and try new things with it. The process of basket making really begins by tree selection. And I guess even backing up even further, it would be like site selection. So black ash is a wetland species, but that's not to say any ash that grows in a wetland is good, right? So there has to be the sort of like healthy quality. So like if you find ash in a bog, it's generally, there's not enough oxygen in the water. The nutrients is sort of like really low. So you get that same growth, but each year is really, really thin. So the materials will be really, really thin. So that transition is not producing as much. So in a healthy stand, you then look for the straightest tree. And then it has to be something that you can actually carry out on your back. So once you've selected your tree and you have it and you're able to transport it to where you're going to process it, the pounding process is generally you have to get every single square inch of the tree with a direct strike of the axe. So each strike has to overlap each strike both vertically and horizontally. If you miss a spot, then those fibers that you're trying to break will remain fused, and those fibers will tear right into the previous year's growth. So the actual pounding process is incredibly important, that it's uniform all the way across. And then once you have that single growth ring, shaving and splitting is basically like you want to do all of that at the same time, so that, like, because as soon as you process a tree, it starts to discolor. Like you can see right there where that strike was, there's a little bit of discoloration on that side. And that's because this had been sitting out for, I think, a week previous. If you just pounded it right as soon as you harvested it, it'll remain nice, clean, white material. And that takes dye better. It makes a brighter basket when you weave with it. It's really like the prize material for most basket makers, especially basket makers that are working with dyes and trying to color the ash. And then most gauges that people have are either family heirlooms that have been passed down, or it's something that you make yourself. You can't go out and buy these tools. So most of the time, they are incredibly ornate and works of art in and of themselves. And that just speaks to the sort of all of the art that goes into all of the process of basket making. Usually when people see this process for the first time, there's this like surprise of like, isn't there an easier way to do that? And I mean, there are lots of easier ways, but all of them detract in some way from the inherent strength that we're putting into these pieces, because doing all of the steps by hand creates that strength within the material. So being able to see as you're splitting it, as you're pounding it, like if you've missed a spot, it really sort of informs how each basket comes together. The first time I actually processed a tree out in the woods where I dropped it was a really incredible thing to sort of like watch the material go from a standing tree in the forest to a basket right there. So you're taking the cellular structure of the tree and then disintegrating all the constituent components and then putting it back together with the same inherent strength that the tree has, but just rearranged. It's pretty incredible. You know, Wabanaki basket making goes back to pre-European contact. And you know, like you can see it in sort of like the shape of the pack basket. Before European contact, our rivers were those were our roads. So every family had a canoe, and this design is basically designed to fit on your back, but then also to fit into the hull of a canoe and actually be stowed away a little bit. So it keeps it out of the way. And that design is sort of echoed within our modern pieces as well. As the European trade sort of like started getting more connected with our culture, that shape became ubiquitous with like the Great North Woods and hunting and trapping and all of this stuff. But people don't realize that it actually dates back to pre-European Americas. And then a lot of our industries became sort of like basket making became a way of making a living. So in the coastal fisheries, you see this a lot, the scale basket. And this was used by different fisheries. You can see they would paint the initial of whatever fishery you were working for, because they were so common. Like there were thousands and thousands and thousands of these things being churned out. And that's on the coast. And then up north, this is a little smaller one, but the potato basket was ubiquitous with farming up there. And so you see that like these things that are just sort of like quintessentially Maine actually are a signature of the Wabanaki culture and how integrated we have been and continue to be within the dominant culture. You know, and then even today, you know, our fancy baskets are still winning awards all over the country. So it's pretty incredible that it all stems from this one incredible unique species of tree.
Eldon Hanning is a Micmac basket maker. He's made thousands of baskets that are used every year in the potato fields in Maine. He has demonstrated here at the Hudson Museum's Wabanaki Winter Market since the Winter Market started. I do have to say, though, that we'll miss Eldon's presence this year at the festival. We'll miss his black hat, his laughs, his humor, but feel free to enjoy this video.
I can barely remember when there wasn't a basket being made in the house. When I started myself making baskets, it's been about 20 years. I was in the military, and I spent 17 years there. Then when I got out, I came home, and I didn't know what I was going to do, so I said, well, I'll work for farmers. So I was working for a farmer one time, and I went up to the land, or up to the band office, and they had baskets up there. And this is the kind of baskets that was I saw. I looked at it, I said, I can do that. And the person said, well, make me one and show me. So I said, well, I gotta get my stuff together I need. So I went out and I bought, my next door neighbor had a Boy Scout axe. Boy Scout axe, this one. Matter of fact, this here is a Boy Scout axe. And this is what I started making baskets with. This is what I use to split my logs, chop them down. Not very big, but it worked. Nobody can turn around and say, hey, how can you work, how can you live on making baskets? For the past 20 years, that's what I've been doing. I've been working, making baskets, and this is how I've been doing it. Making my baskets, splitting the logs, hewing them out, pounding them, preparing the wood. I make my baskets, and the last 15 years I've been selling wood to other people, basket wood. Yeah, like right now I got, let me think, there's 65 bundles to one person I gotta get, 30 to another one, 30 potato baskets to one person, 25 to another, So there's about 5 or 6 farmers that still use potato baskets. The white wood I sell to the brown, and I sell to separate it. The sapwood I sell to Basketmakers up here in Maine. The brown I sell to other people. I got 10 bags, what I consider 10 bags, which is 70-year-olds. I got to get ready for the Basketmakers in Canada that buys wood off me. What I'm doing right now, a lot of people can't do. I don't understand why, but they say that they can't judge the wood or don't realize what they're doing. Listen. Okay. I notched the end so that it's on a growth ring. And what's happening right now is it's following that growth ring down. First, I'm taking off the bark. What I'm doing is I'm blocking it out, but I'm also, this here, I'm also taking the pieces that are going to flake off. I'm following the grain. The pounding machine here, it came from a foundry. Okay? Some of the Canadian boys were in, they went to a foundry, and, well, one of them was working there. They went to see him, and they saw the pounder, right? Something similar to this, but industrial strength. And they turned around and saw it, and they looked at it, and they said, you know, if we had something like that, we could use it to pound our wood with. Now, all this wood is ready to go.
Yep, it's floating down.
Mm-hmm. You hear the trees? You hear that distinctive sound? That's the wind blowing through that ash down there. So, yeah, it's nice down here, and I enjoy it. But you wouldn't think that you could hear it. But after a while you do. Or maybe it's just psychological or whatever. But I can sit here and I can hear it. Yeah, I can hear the trees. Now, when you're selecting a tree, you have to look at the area you're in. Okay, now this area that we're in, you can see all the ash trees around here. All these trees that we see, there's something I don't like about them. So, if you'll follow me, I'll show you the trees. Now, down here There's one right here ahead of us.
Yes.
Okay. Now it's a good tree, got a good limbs on it, right? And it's got a slight bow. We're gonna try and drop it down in there. I like to harvest logs the middle of September and November, because that's when the trees are losing their leaves and they're soaking up the water. Right? Soak up water to store for the winter time. My father would go out and cut, and when he cut, he'd go around and look at the trees and never explain nothing, but he would turn around and look it up and down and see what was good, right, what was bad. And after a while you get the feeling that, you know, when you walk out and you look at all the trees around here, there's, you know, you can pick the difference, you know. And that's a pretty log. It's it'll give me 18 feet. And each log will give me enough wood to probably make 30 baskets. Okay. Now the white on this is very thin. I may not be able to use this for other basket makers. I may, but I don't think so. So the majority of what I'll use is the brown wood for other basket makers. About 2.5 inches of white wood, brown wood on this cut. Right now, out of all these 200 trees, I cut 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 trees out of over 200 trees. The emerald ash borer, have I seen any? No, I haven't seen any. Am I concerned about it? Yes, I am, because right now I understand that it's up around New York, upstate New York area. And when they start flying and getting ready to reproduce, and they get caught on a good wind, they can travel maybe 20 miles or more in a day. Cutting on people's property is, it's hard sometimes, but other times, if they're Rooster County people, it's no problem. But the problem is of getting the wood to cut is from people from out of state. People that buys farms or buys land in northern Maine here, farms, they turn around and go, well, I bought the land, so it's my wood and I don't want nobody on it. So they post it. And you can't make people realize that before they came here, the farmers that you was cutting right would let you cut ash for making baskets. And I enjoy doing it. This is the easy part, walking out of the woods. This is about the easiest part there is.
Jennifer Neptune is the Executive Director of the Maine Indian Basketmakers Alliance. Their main goal is to preserve brown ash and sweetgrass basketry. There's a story that goes way back that involves somebody named Gluskab, or in Penobscot we refer to him in our dialect as Gluskabe. And Gluskabe shot an arrow into an ash tree. That ash tree split, and from that split out came women and children. Brown ash is a very important tree to our people. It has a very utilitarian feature to it where we can make baskets that we can use every day, but today people like the baskets more for decorations.
My name is Jennifer Neptune. I'm Penobscot from Indian Island. I'm a basket maker, a beadworker, and a Maine guide. I make baskets out of brown ash and sweetgrass. Sweetgrass grows in the salt marshes along the coast, and it's very fragrant, smells really good. I always say that basket makers have the best smelling houses because the ash smells good, the sweetgrass smells good. We use it straight and we use it braided. We use it a couple of different ways. And I brought an example of some braid. There are women that just specialize in braiding the grass, and they'll braid it like 100 yards at a time and then either trade or sell it to the women who make the baskets. And it's really special. It takes a long time to process and pick and braid. We pick it in the summer months. There's a couple of months when it's good to pick it along the coast, and then we store it up and braid it through the winter. And I have an example of a basket that's made with both braided grass and the straight sweetgrass. So this is the bottom of a sweetgrass flat basket, so it will have a cover that looks pretty much the same as the bottom. And in the center here you can see the straight grass that's woven in to the center, and it's almost like it's almost like weaving with thread because it's so thin and it takes a long time to just keep weaving it around and around. And then as it comes out further, you can see how it kind of transitions into the braided sweetgrass that's done along the bottom and along the sides. And a lot of the time in that is, braiding it before you start to weave with it. So this basket is an old style. They were really popular in the 1800s and early 1900s, and women made all different sizes of these, and they were used a lot as sewing baskets. So people would store their all their little sewing things in there, and they were nice because you could tuck it under your arm and carry it with you if you wanted to go visit a friend or take it outside to work on your sewing. And not a lot of people do these anymore just because it's so labor intensive with the straight grass and the braided grass. I do a lot of miniature baskets, and here's a little teeny tiny basket this will either end up with a handle as just a little miniature basket, and sometimes I do these as little pin cushions that can go inside like a sweetgrass flat. So some of the older styles are pin cushions, needle holders, scissor holders that go over the pointy part of scissors. There were whole sewing kits that went with the sweetgrass flats and the open sewing baskets to store all your little odds and ends of sewing. Thimble holders. And this basket was woven on an antique block that I have, so just so you can see kind of the shape. Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, and Maliseet weavers weave around molds or blocks that give it the shape. So when I made that basket, I made it on this block. And the blocks come in different shapes and sizes. So this one is another old one, and this shape would be used for an acorn basket or a strawberry basket. And then for a miniature version, this is a real acorn that I weave around to make a life-size acorn basket. And I also do little strawberry baskets on this block. The blocks are kind of ingenious how they were made. There are ones that we call puzzle molds or puzzle blocks, and they come apart. So this is a sea urchin mold, and you can see how it curves around. So when you weave your basket around the side, you wouldn't be able to take the block out of the inside of the basket unless it came apart, so you could do that. So when I'm done weaving around to there, then I'll pull out the middle, and then the pieces will come out of the basket and it will all come apart. So I can remove it after I'm done weaving. And here's some examples of baskets that were woven on a similar block that you can take apart because they come in at the sides. And this is a pineapple basket. And this was woven on a barrel block. So again, those come in different sizes. And this is a medium-sized one. The ash has to be really, really good to make a basket like this to do the points. It needs to be at least double split, and sometimes split even more, triple split to get it thin enough. So it has to be almost like paper to make those points, and for the leaves on the top. As time goes on, ash is going to get more difficult to obtain, and the special ash that you can split down to be able to do work like this is going to be harder to get. So emerald ash borer is an invasive beetle that has made its appearance in Maine in the past couple of years. It's a real problem for us. As basket makers, the only tree and the only material that we use to make our baskets, like our fancy baskets and pack baskets, is brown ash. It's also called black ash. And it's the favorite tree of the emerald ash borer, which lays its eggs underneath the bark, and the larvae lives underneath and pretty much girdles the tree, and I'll show you an example of that. So we've worked really, really hard, the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance and basket makers in all our communities have worked really hard to ensure that this tradition survives, and we've taught a lot of apprentices and done a lot of workshops to make sure that this tradition stays strong. And when we started in the early 90s, we never foresaw that it would be a little tiny beetle that would be the real threat to us. So In this little vial, there's an adult emerald ash borer beetle. And these ordinarily live in Asia, northern Asia, so northern China, Mongolia, Korea, that area. And they prey on ash trees. They use it as a host tree for their larvae. And it came over here in the early 2000s, we think on probably shipping pallets. It was first found in Michigan. And the problem is when they lay their eggs, the larvae will live underneath the bark, and it's a you know, it looks like a little worm when it's in the larval stage. And what it does is it eats that sap layer that's underneath the bark, and it ends up girdling the tree and eventually killing it. So if we take this off, you can see under the bark and along the outside of the wood there, the S-shape grooves that it's made, and that's the larvae as it moves and eats. And after about 5 years or so, it ends up girdling the tree completely and killing the tree. And one of the problems is it's usually in a location for 5 or so years before the trees start to die and people notice. So here in Maine, there's been a big effort to do early identification and stay right on top of it. We were lucky to hear about it coming in the, the early 2000s. Weavers from Michigan warned us about the beetle and that it was killing all their trees that they also make baskets with. And they gave us a heads up on that. So the University of Maine, the Maine Forest Service, the USDA, all combined forces to prepare for its eventual arrival. The sad part about emerald ash borer is that it's moving from people. So on its own, it can only fly a very short amount of, area. If it was just moving on its own, it would probably still be around the Great Lakes. But what happens is people move firewood, mostly unintentionally, not knowing that it's infected, that the larvae are underneath the bark where they can't see it. And they'll move wood to another state or, within a state, and that keeps spreading the beetle further and further. So it's here in Maine earlier than we expected. We knew we couldn't hold it off forever, but still it was a shock when it was finally discovered here. And the sad part about it is that all of the new discoveries of it, so just recently it was found in 7 other Maine communities. All of that is from people moving firewood. And at this point in time, everybody should know better than that. There's been a big push to educate people all across the country that moving firewood is moving this pest and moving other invasive species. We live in the most forested state on the East Coast, and there's no reason why, if you're camping or you're going to a camp or going to a second home, that you can't buy firewood closer to where you're going. And as a Maine guide, I can tell you, if you're going out into the Maine woods to do some, backcountry camping, I have never been any place where you couldn't find down trees to build your fire with. So there's really no excuse for moving this wood and infecting other places with it. This impacts us and our thousands of year old tradition. We may in the future not be able to make baskets anymore if all the trees are gone. But also it impacts people who play baseball. The baseball bats are made out of ash. It impacts people who like to snowshoe with traditional style snowshoes. That rim is made out of ash. Wood canvas canoes a lot of times use ash. Paddles, you know, some of the best canoe paddles are made out of ash. It has qualities that allow it to be strong but also have flexibility, and there aren't other trees that do that. So even if you don't care about baskets, you should care about those things and the environment. So we've had a lot of drought in Maine this year, and these trees grow in wetlands. They grow along riverbanks and streams, and they're an important part of the ecosystem and the water tables. So their loss will also be a huge impact on the environment. If you don't care about the environment, then I'd ask you to care about your neighborhood and your town and your community. After elm trees started dying of Dutch elm disease and had to be removed, a lot of communities replanted city trees along the streets with ash trees. And I've been to Michigan, I've been to the Great Lakes, and I've seen how devastating it is in cities and along streets when all those trees have to be removed because they're infected with EAB. It costs a lot of money, but also the emotional impact of living on a street that no longer has trees is really sad to see. So as someone who cares about traditions and the environment and, you know, also people's happiness, I'm just asking everyone to please be extra careful and not move firewood from anywhere. Let's keep it located where it is and try to keep it in check. So I know Gabriel Frey talked a lot about utility baskets, and so I just want to share some information about fancy baskets. Baskets tend to fall in two categories: utility baskets, which are packed baskets, carrying baskets, harvesting baskets, and what we call fancy baskets, which are sometimes smaller, they use finer weave of ash, fancy designs in them. So for example, the pineapple, this is called a porcupine weave, and that's a fancy basket weave. They're functional, like you can use them usually, like you could use this for storage, but mostly they're decorative. That this is meant to be decorative and put on a shelf, and maybe you put special things in it. Other fancy baskets are small or miniature. Sometimes they're useful. A sweetgrass flat is considered a fancy basket. Fancy baskets, along with utility baskets too, served a really important purpose in all of our communities in that they're useful, but also they helped Wabanaki families and communities survive a hard transition from hunting, gathering, fishing, being able to survive like that, to, you know, when the whole world changed and settlers came and they changed the landscape, the rivers. By damming them, the fish could no longer get to Indian Island, where I'm from, so salmon fishing was out in Old Town once there was a dam there, in the amounts that could sustain a community. As farming and logging changed the landscape, it changed ways that we could harvest deer and moose and even caribou back in the day. So there had to be another way to survive, and our traditions of basket making and carving and a lot of those artistic and functional traditions allowed us to trade for food or sell them for cash. And we were really fortunate here in Maine that in the Victorian times, wealthy people wanted to get out of the cities in the summer and get to someplace beautiful where there was fresh air, and they came to Maine along the coast. And in our traditional movement on the land, that's also where Penobscot and Passamaquoddy people were going in the summer. So we were going there to fish, to seal, to get bird eggs, to pick sweetgrass, to harvest clams and do all those summer things. But then all these wealthy summer people started showing up, and it just worked out beautifully for us that we could make baskets that appealed to them that they would purchase from us. So basket making became a way to survive. It became a way to continue a traditional lifestyle of movement on the landscape. It allowed us to go to the ocean in the summer where we wanted to be anyway. So it worked out really well. And in the late 1800s, when tourism in Maine started to boom, and Bar Harbor and Kennebunkport and all these summer, what we think of as summer towns, you know, sprung up, people would come to our little villages on the coast and visit our tents and buy baskets from our ancestors. And so fancy basket styles really took off and took a life of their own during that time, and got more and more fancy and more elaborate, and to appeal to that Victorian taste of the time. And so baskets were made for every conceivable reason that you can think of. So to hang on walls, to hold watches, to hold little cups that you could travel with, sewing baskets, thimble baskets, baskets to hold women's hair, to hold collar stays. All kinds of different amazing styles of baskets came out of that time, and there's still styles that we make today. So emerald ash borer has made a lot of us kind of look even further back into our traditions and to look for other materials that our ancestors made baskets from. So if there does come a time where we can't make ash baskets anymore, what are the other materials that our ancestors used? So the inner bark of cedar is one, and basswood is another important one. So in our language, the word for the basswood fiber and the brown ash fiber is the same word. They share the same word. And it's really unique. What you do is you use the inner bark, and it has to be prepared a certain way. It's really labor intensive, and I think that's why once we started to make baskets to sell to outsiders, that this kind of dropped off. So basswood would have been used traditionally to make hunting bags, to make rope, cordage, and to make tump lines. And tump lines were used to hook onto utility baskets, to hook onto toboggans, and they run, they're woven flat, and they run across either your chest or your head to help distribute the weight when you're carrying a heavy load, or you're carrying, pulling a toboggan, or you're portaging a canoe. Sometimes people will use a tump line to kind of help you distribute the weight better. It's really, really strong. And it comes from the inner bark, and you have to, get the bark off the tree, and then there's a couple of different ways that you have to prepare the fiber. It's not like you can just peel it off and start using it. It either has to be put into moving water where it can break down the fibers, or boiled with wood ashes, again, to break down the fiber. When it's ready, it smells really good too. If you could smell it, it smells amazing. It will, it feels almost like fabric, and it splits apart similar to the way that ash does. So you can do fine work or you can do heavy work depending on what you're going to make with it, but it will peel apart. It'll also break apart lengthwise like that into different strips. And then it can be rolled into cordage. It can be braided to be woven with. So the Hudson Museum has an amazing basswood bag here, a hunting bag that has, you know, it's been braided like yards and yards and yards of braid to be able to do that. So this is something that I've been experimenting with, and you know, some other women in my community have been experimenting with to try to recreate those bags and you know, try that tradition out, see if we can revive that so we have something else to work with as well as ash, because we're not going to give up on ash. This is the collar, the chief's collar. The original one, this one was made in the mid-1800s with floral designs. There were a lot of collars made that were worn in the community with different designs. The collar that's at the Hudson Museum here comes out and it visits us when we have tribal inaugurations. So when the chief is inaugurated, the collar comes from the museum to Indian Island and it's there during the ceremony. But it's not, it's too fragile to wear, so it can't be like a physical part of the ceremony anymore. It's just there, you know, in spirit. And so that was one of the things in the community, like the elders wanted and the chief wanted, was a collar that could really be used and could be part of the ceremony again. So they contacted me and asked me to recreate the one that's here, the cuffs and the collar, so that it could be used, and then also make a headdress that could go with it. My own beliefs as being a Native person and going into anthropology it was important for me to be able to give back to my own community what I was learning and what I knew, and, you know, gifts that I have. And luckily that is a gift that I have, to be able to create these things and do that type of beadwork and basketry, and, you know, combining having access to them with being able to recreate them is my way of giving back to my community and bringing these objects that left kind of back into our world, where people can see them and be inspired by them and, you know, be proud of our art and, you know, what our tribe created. It was a big honor for me, and I feel really honored to be asked, and I hope that it will be inspiring for our community and, you know, bring a lot of good energy that way. You know, I put a lot of love and heart and spirit into it, and I hope that it keeps radiating that out for the future.
Mary Sanipass, a Micmac basket maker, was one of the founding members of the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance. She has passed on her knowledge and skills to her family, and they still create baskets today.
Right now I'm making a potato basket, which is a tradition of Aroostook County. I have the bottom all made, and I'm going to start weaving it up. Yeah. It's a famous basket from Aroostook. I grew up here in Maine, but I came over when I was 16. And so I came to pick potatoes. And I might have left a few times, go back, but I always came back. Yeah. I used to come here early in the season, just to, me and Don, we used to go out in the woods, gather hash and sit down and make potato baskets for farmers. A lot of farmers wanted potato baskets, practically every farmer did. Yeah, so people used to come over and make potato baskets while they're waiting for potato picking. Yeah. Now, well, way back we made our living on baskets, and kids were small. They helped me and Don. They did the cleaning the splints. We have a cleaner, and they did they weaved the basket up, and I made the bottoms and fixed the wood for them, and we all got together, and we'll have 100 baskets within a week. Yeah, but we don't do that now. My kids are all gone, left. They do their own thing. Everything we did was partners, so that's why we were good at doing baskets. And if we didn't want to do baskets, we go in the woods and cut a load of wood. So, yeah, but nighttime we come home. It's mostly nighttime work. I sit down rest of the night and make baskets. Yeah. Back, I remember when they gave me 25 cents for potato basket.
25 cents.
And baskets weren't selling then. The Indians were hard to find. They were all scattered all over Maine. Wherever a farmer was, maybe 1 or 2 families there and here. And they weren't getting much of anything, really. And if you made fancy baskets, you didn't get nothing for them. So this wood dries fast. You dampen it to keep it from, soften it up a little bit. And this dried up too. Takes a long while to make baskets. Got to put all your time in it. It's not like working in the office or something. You can take off, This, you can do it right after supper, maybe. So sometimes I stay up. If I have an order, I'll stay up till 2 o'clock to finish. Yeah. This is where my students have a hard time beginning the basket. Yeah. When my grandparents teach anyone, they don't sit down and go one splint at a time. You just watch them. And if you can help, go ahead and try, It depends on you. And I used to love to help them. Then they'll give me the scraps left over, and I would take them home and make little baskets. Families do it. Kids all get into the splints and try to make baskets too. No, it's fun. I like doing it. I know soon I won't be able to because of my hands are beginning to arthritis setting in. I was getting a little scarce now. And besides, I guess it got diseased or something. If the wood keeps up, it could survive, but the wood is kind of dying out a little. It's the wood I'm worried about. We don't know how long hash is going to last.
So within my family, there are many decades of basket making. My great-grandmother, my grandmother, growing up, I remember them making baskets, braiding sweetgrass 3 strands at a time on a chair, cutting, stripping ash, weaving together these baskets. They were sold all over the state of Maine in warm weather to tourists. And an interesting little story is I went to South Carolina because I was in a play. And we stayed at this old plantation. And I wasn't feeling very well. It was February. I had flown down during a nor'easter storm. It was a bumpy ride. But when I got there, I relaxed on a bed. And I thought I could smell sweetgrass. I thought I must be going crazy. I got up, I went to the window to look out to see if they were cutting grass, to see what the smell might be. And I looked down. And when I did, I saw a basket. The basket was small. It was sort of flat. And when I opened it, the essence of sweetgrass came from that basket. On the bottom of the basket was written 1920. Maine, Poland Springs. That's one place that my family used to sell their baskets during the summer. I wondered if that basket was from either my great-grandmother or my grandmother. Baskets are all over the United States and all over the world that come from right here. The materials, the resources that are gathered to create those baskets come from here as well. It's an honor to know that my family's baskets are out there in various places and still being enjoyed to this day. Barry Dana is a former Penobscot tribal chief. He's also a former teacher at the Indian Island School, where he taught for a number of years cultural aspects of Wabanaki life, everyday life, and survival. He continued on his career by visiting many schools in the state of Maine, building lodges for demonstration purposes and for practical purposes, and has continued to do that work on his own. He is one of our few birchbark basket makers, and he makes a wide variety of different kind of birchbark baskets, anywhere from strip baskets to entire sheets of baskets, all the way to canoes.
My name is Barry Dana from the Penobscot Nation, and I am a basket maker. Although I didn't start out that way. I started out following traditions of the Penobscot people in the idea of hunting and trapping and speaking the language. In that pursuit to revive my language, I met an elder, a lady that had moved back to the reservation from Connecticut. She had lived down there for 30 years. And she knew basketry and she was fluent in the language. So I went to her and she agreed to teach me. And she taught me ash basketry and said that if I learn how to make baskets, then I'll always have money. And well, I was there to learn the language, but in the process I learned ash basket making. So later on, I wanted to learn baskets, but I didn't really have the desire to learn ash baskets. I made them, but there was something about them that, you know, they were plentiful. There were many people making ash baskets. And I met a fellow who made birchbark items. He made actually birchbark canoes and baskets. And I was just taken by that because that was an aspect of the culture that had not been transmitted down through the generations. People were simply making ash baskets and making a living off it. So I was a teacher at the time, so as far as money goes, I was all set there. But I really kind of dove into the birchbark culture of my people, the Wabanaki. And my first attempt at anything birchbark was a canoe, and it didn't really go very well. That canoe ended up becoming part of my next year's wood stove, heating the home. But it was a great learning opportunity, and in that process I started making these really simple birchbark baskets. And for some reason, I got an invitation to the first ever Maine Indian Basket Alliance show here at the university. And I thought, wow, but I'm not really a basket maker. My wife reminded me that, well, you do make baskets, so why don't you just sell those? And I said, well, it might be fun. So I think I brought 7 simple little baskets, and all 7 sold, so that was it. I was hooked. You know, you can make a simple art form that's traditional and people value it, and it not only preserves the culture, but you know, you can make extra money. So Madeline Shea, my basket make teacher, she was right. You know, here it is. I made baskets and I sold them. Not only did I make baskets, but I'm also an artist in terms of you know, modern day art with paintings and drawings. So I decided that with the basket making, I wanted to know if there was a way I could combine my artistic background with actually making baskets. So making the basket is one thing. You have to know the tradition there. You know, the whole culture of making a basket doesn't just, you know, end with the sale. It begins actually going into the woods and gathering the material. And that really, for me, is what I consider the most spiritual aspect of making baskets. It really connects me with the same actions, the same things that my ancestors did. And that's where a good quality basket begins, is selecting the right material. You can walk into a stand of 100 birch trees, and only one of those may be good enough to for really high quality basket etching. These baskets that have the etchings in them, it's the white birch tree, but you have to take the bark off in the fall or the spring, right before winter or right after winter. So this extra layer adheres to the tree. It grows from the tree onto the bark in the fall. And then in the spring it grows from the bark back to the tree, and so that in the summer you don't have this bark anymore to do the artwork. So you go out in the fall and the spring, and this winter bark comes off the tree very, very hard. You really have to know what you're doing, or you can ruin the sheet. Bark can split. So a lot of trial and error, a lot of ruined sheets of bark, just like my canoe. I had to ruin a few baskets, but in time, if you just keep with it, I developed a keen sense of what tree is going to make that right basket. So you have to take a little sample, check it out, and then decide whether or not you're going to take that. So along with gathering the bark, I have to dig the roots. The roots are the lacings around, and the roots are what stitches the side. This is a nice sheet of bark that you have to heat and fold up, so it's all one sheet. And it's extremely rare for me to be able to find a quality sheet of bark this size to make a basket this size. Much easier to find a sheet of bark that'll make a small basket, which is really fun to make. This one in particular, though, it's like I'm going to say 1 in 1,000 sheets of bark that I take do I get a quality sheet this big. So you have to dig the roots, you have to know how to prepare the roots, and also one thing I picked up from my canoe making was this is cedar. The rim around the top is cedar. And this is all hand split from a tree. It's carved with a knife. So there's nothing really, you know, too modern about the way this basket was made. And that's really the culture of basket making, is knowing how my ancestors did it. There's a whole lot of thought that goes into, you know, putting this together, and I'm always so impressed that my ancestors figured out, how do you do this from nature? Who was the first one to make a basket? Who was the first one to make a canoe? And it's it's mind-boggling to know that they went for thousands of years developing this, and this here is the end result. Going back in time, a basket like this would be for storing food. We would dry fish, dry meat, moose and deer and caribou. We also dry our vegetables that we grow, and it would have a lid. I didn't make a lid for this because, well, you really want the lid to be the exact same bark as the basket, and this particular sheet only had enough for this basket. But the lid would keep the food inside fresh and keep animals out of it. So in time, the art, it's become an art form. You know, people want to call this a craft, and I suppose it fits the definition. But for me personally, this is not only just art. It's not to me, it's not a craft at all. It's high-end art. It's high-end cultural knowledge and preserving a culture by not just making a basket, but preserving the entire culture of what it takes to make that basket. I think that's probably what motivates me the most. It's nice to be able to sell and keep it going, keep myself going as an artist. But my real mission here is the preservation of Penobscot culture and Wabanaki culture in general. Birchbark has a ton of uses in a traditional culture. I like to say that birchbark by far is one of the top on the list of materials that Native people would have used in their lifestyle. You figure we didn't have cars, so we lived along rivers, and our transportation was the birchbark canoe. Our homes were covered in sheets of birchbark. We made leggings out of birchbark. You make eye goggles in the winter to keep from getting snow blindness, all out of birchbark. Tons of different food receptacles. You can make a basket for gathering maple sap, and in that same basket, boil it down into rock-hard maple candy. Here's a moose call I made as a demo. You know, this right here will call in a bull moose, and that's of course our food sustenance. So I think if we are going to prioritize preservation of culture, we can't put all our eggs in one basket, if you would. So I took it upon myself to broaden the concept of basket making within the Wabanaki communities and bring back the birch bark as a critical, most important aspect of preserving culture. I'm very honored and to be recognized as a birch bark basket maker and also a teacher. I like to pass this tradition on to the younger generation. I had an apprentice this past year who made baskets. He made a birch bark canoe with me, and he also made a birch bark wigwam. So that to me says, if I pass it on, then the culture of the basketry and birch bark working lives past me, which is really important for our community. If all else fails, in terms of the economy, you know, with COVID, in terms of who knows what with climate change, we have pests that are coming into Maine, damaging trees. I think it's important that we broaden our skills and know how to use the gifts of nature to make our lives meaningful. We, as humans, we are pretty useless in terms of providing for ourselves. We can't catch a fish with our feet like an eagle can. You know, we don't have the right fur to live in the winter the way animals do. So we have to use our mind and our brain to figure out how to use nature to our benefit. Birch bark allows us to carry water, cook our food, store our food, transport us up and down the riverways, cover us in the snows of winter. And it's just an all-around #1 material that the Wabanaki used. And when anything becomes that special, we tend to think of it as sacred. And I'm always thinking that when I'm going up to a tree and I'm going to take its bark, that this is a very sacred moment. You know, that bark, that tree, that giving itself so that I can use it for something that I find important. So I think with all Native artists, that's probably something you'll find, that it's not just art. It's culture, it's a way of life, it's sacred. So in that sense, it's very important that we understand our human connection to the earth. If we don't treat the earth right, these materials are not going to give themselves to us. It'll minimize, it'll damage anything that we as humans were given by creation to, you know, live a happy life. So when I talk about preserving basket making or preserving anything within the culture, it's at the same time we have to give the same recognition, the same priority to preserving the earth. So I always ask people to be very mindful of what their actions are in terms of our behaviors causing climate change. If you change the climate, we're not going to have these materials. Things will go away. Species are already dying. So the trees in Maine are already dying back. You know, the bark is getting harder to find this quality bark for etching. It's getting harder. You have deforestation here in the state, and even on our native lands, you know, we have to survive financially, so we're cutting the trees as well. So I'm always encouraging people to know what the cultural needs are of the people and preserve those. So with that, I'd just like to say that I'm very honored that I'm part of keeping this tradition alive. Okay, so this is a very special sheet of bark, and I make the basket first, I get it all done, and then I set it aside for as long as it takes for me to get the inspiration for what I should be etching onto it. And you'll notice, it may be hard to see up at a distance, but if you could close up on this, everything that goes into the etching, the artwork, comes from my culture, but I almost sense that it comes to me almost in a spiritual manner. There are certain, I'll look at the bark really close, and I'll look at it and I think, what should come out of that bark? And almost always, when I've got a bigger sheet of bark, what needs to come out is the ancestors that were here before me. So I always like to look for a native profile that really speaks to the essence of the culture and our ancestors. So I have men, women, children that represent the ancestors, and it's almost a way of allowing them to come out of the bark, because when we die, we don't just go away, we become part of everything around us. So the ancestors are literally in this bark, even before I do any work on it. So when I etch this face, it allows that person who died 5,000 years ago to come out through the bark. So it's a way of releasing their spirit and letting them become part of our mind. And you notice the so here I have the globe, I have the earth, and to me that's the symbol of what we need to be focusing on. You know, we need to be honoring the earth. And a lot of people you'll hear people talk in native ways about particular animals that will come to them, that sends them messages, kind of guides them along their path through life. So for me, I'll look at the bark, and I'm not going to like pick a particular animal because it's maybe my favorite animal, but I'll look at the bark and I'll say, okay, well, what I'm seeing here is a wolf. So then I'll etch the wolf, and I've got the stars here that kind of connect the universe. And we have an owl. It's actually a snowy owl from the Arctic because they come here as well. And I make sure there's two types of etching for birch bark. One is called traditional and one is called contemporary. Contemporary was more like stick figures, people on snowshoes hunting moose with a bow and arrow, but they were stick figures. So I take the idea of contemporary to modern type of art. So not just stick figures, but actual people themselves. But I also am responsible for preserving the traditional etching, which is the double curve Wabanaki or Penobscot double curve designs. And this here is unity amongst the people. So it's sort of like I'm honoring my traditions when I put those symbols in there. And probably for me personally, one of the most important things I can etch on a basket is where we came from as Wabanaki people. You know, people want to talk about natives coming across the Bering Strait. Well, that's just not true. No native people subscribe to that. We came from the earth. And our traditions, our legends talk about coming from Katahdin. The Katahdin is our homeland. Katahdin is where our place of birth. So I put that in there to remind us all that Katahdin is our sacred place. Not that any other place is less sacred, but when you get a mountain, you get way more energy coming together in one place. And then down here I've got this turtle. The turtle in many, many cultures represents that being that is right immersed in the earth and is really the keeper of wisdom. So I like to put that in there. You know, you can see it as just, you know, like if you were looking at someone's painting, like wildlife or landscapes. But in an etching, my purpose for bringing those forward in the bark is the preservation of culture, the preservation of values, and really keeping this entire thing sacred. One really important aspect of understanding other cultures is hearing directly from someone of that culture. Here in Maine, we have Wabanaki people all over the state. And more times than not, you can hear someone from the state of Maine saying, I didn't even know we had Wabanaki people in the state. So the state itself created a law, LD 291, that requires schools to teach about Native people in the state of Maine. And in that law, the number one component for doing this is inviting Native people into your classroom. There's other ways it can be done as well, but the best way is to bring the Native people directly into the classroom so that they can have a face-to-face time with the students and the staff. So I make myself available for that. I will travel to schools throughout Maine. I've even gone a little bit into New Hampshire, but I will spend the day. Sometimes I'll spend 5 days in an artist residency, and we talk about Native culture, Native history, modern, current events. Depending on what the school wants, I actually will take the students outdoors. We can do plant walks. I teach them how to make fires without matches, how to make shelters out of natural materials in the woods that they have outside of their school. And I'll also bring into the classroom a birchbark wigwam. I'll bring in baskets and hides and snowshoes and other things from the culture. So we talk about the past as they should know about, how Maine was sort of started, but it started with Native people here, and we're still here. That's the point that I make. And I also want them to know about the past, but I also make it really important statements about the fact that we're still here, and we may not be living like we did in the past, and they need to know that Native people live amongst them, and we live just like they do. And I started this some 20, 30 years ago, and at that time I was getting questions like, do Indians still live in teepees? And that question is not really being asked anymore. So it's working. Schools have become more open to Native representatives coming in, and the message is getting out there. There's Native people developing the curriculum, and I think that's what's really important. All too often we have, without Native input, you're going to have resources that are void of the Native perspective and void of what Natives know about our own history. You'll get history writers that recreate history in the image that they want to see it, and it's oftentimes not true. So now Maine schools are learning about the atrocities of Columbus and the real story behind Thanksgiving. So it's only really Natives that can bring these matters before the students in such a way that the students are going to remember them. If you have a non-Native teaching the information, it's good because it needs to be taught, but it's not as effective as a Native person right in the classroom with the students. So that's been my discovery. And I often get asked back to schools because each year they have a different group of kids. So I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to make myself available to visit schools all through Maine, K through 12, college, groups beyond college. I've done them all, and I would be so glad when we nail this COVID thing so I can get back into the classroom. They've all been canceled for this year, so I really missed that, and I'm looking forward to getting back into the schools because it's important. So give me a call. Check out the university website, and they'll have information on my school visit program, I call it. Thank you.
James Eric Francis Sr. is a Penobscot artist and historian. He's the director of the Cultural Preservation Office on Indian Island for the Penobscot Nation.
I'm James Eric Francis. I'm the Penobscot Nation's Director of Cultural and Historic Preservation. I'm also an artist. The types of art I like to do is I paint with acrylics. Lately I've been doing a lot of painting with dots, getting the paint just the right consistency so when you lay it on the canvas you get a nice round circle. I also do a lot of painting of drums, hand drums. Most of my drums are commissioned works. I really try to personalize the drums to the client's needs. I also do photography. Recently, I've been shooting a lot of time-lapse photography, taking thousands of pictures and stringing them together as high-resolution videos. Some of these are of landscapes, but most are done at night, capturing the star field and the motion of the Earth as we spin through space. This particular piece, which is in the Hudson Museum collection, is called Ka-chee-kee. The word in Penobscot for an arrow penetrating something is key. And I call this Ka-chee-kee because Ka-chee is something grand or great. So this is the great penetrating of the arrow. This tree here is an ash tree. And in Penobscot oral stories, Glooskap, our cultural hero, shot an arrow into an ash tree. And that ash tree split open creating all the animals that we find in our homeland, including people. So this creation myth I wanted to capture here in this piece. You can see we have a deer, people, birds, a couple of raccoons, a male and a female. I'm sure they all came out 2 by 2. And I painted this using geometric shapes, so polygons, creating all of the animals. This piece was done in 2019. So this piece is called Just in Time. Again, really calling on our Penobscot oral traditions. This is a hunter who's just returning home from a winter hunt. He has his kill on a toboggan, and he's just approaching his home. And it's called Just in Time because just beyond the wigwam, revealing itself from the forest, is a sasset. A sasset is a flaming skeleton in our culture, and he represents either freezing to death or, in this case, starving to death. And so this hunter showing up with food just before a sasset begins to knock on the wigwam is why I call it Just in Time. This piece here is called Welcome Home. It is one of the first paintings that I did using dots, a lot of dots. And each one of these dots actually represents a salmon. And it's called Welcome Home because of the Penobscot River Restoration Project, which removed 2 dams within the Penobscot system, allowing salmon to return back to reservation waters. And so I did this with that in mind. There are 3 salmon here, 2 blue, which kind of blend into the background, and then this centrally figured brownish colored salmon. But again, each one of these dots represents a salmon that has returned back to Penobscot waters. This piece, called Turtle Love, is a second version of the same concept called Oak Hill Dream that I did many years ago in pen and ink. So this is a more colorful version of the original, which was just black and white. But this features 2 oak trees and a wigwam and a couple under a blanket, which has a turtle on the back of the blanket. They're enjoying the sunrise. But you also can see that the sunrise is pushing out the night sky. The whole sky, everything is done with dots of paint. And also where the trees overlap, you can see a turtle shell with its 13 tiles, his head, his arms, and his legs. So along with the Welcome Home in this, I've done about 6 or so paintings that strictly use dots. I created 2, one quite large of salmon and a fishing spear, and which actually went to Germany. But the dots came to me as I was watching Chris Okalex's flint knapping, this methodical removal of material from a stone. And I thought it'd be interesting to create a painting that kind of had that same sensibility of instead of extractive like making an arrowhead, added just these small dots, and when they all come together, they create these paintings. So the drums that I paint started with a project that got funded by the New England Foundation for the Arts. It was called the New Moon Drum Project. And these drums, which are now housed at the Penobscot Nation Museum, depicted our moons, the Penobscot calendar. And I painted these during the time of each of the moons. So it took me 13 moons to paint these 13 drums. And I was really inspired by the landscape and by the environment when I painted these. Oftentimes spending right up almost to the next moon to paint the drum, because I really wanted to be inspired by the time, by that moon, before I started painting the drums. Today, most of my drums are commissioned. I really like to talk with the clients when they order a drum. You know, what types of animals do they like? What colors do they want Penobscot designs on them, or Passamaquoddy, Micmac, or Maliseet? And I design drums specifically for them. In fact, I remember painting one drum that had a Harley-Davidson motorcycle on it that was embellished with beadwork from a very important collar that's housed here at the Hudson Museum. So I also do time-lapse photography. Oftentimes, those are also commissioned jobs. Filmmakers will need a time-lapse to fill in some gaps within their films, and so I will shoot these time-lapses. Shooting high-quality photographs that are stitched together gives you a richer image rather than just filming it straight to video. Oftentimes I will do this at night, capturing the movement of the planet through the stars. And in 2014, I shot one that shot 5,000 plus pictures overnight and captured the northern lights over Mount Katahdin. Early in 2020, and I'm reading from the exhibit catalog, or part of the exhibit catalog from Maine Historical Society, I did a piece called "We Walk On Eternally." And what this is a document called the 1755 Spencer Phipps Proclamation. And then in 1755, this was an attempt to clear the region of Penobscot people. In fact, in here, it offered bounties for the pursuing, captivating, killing, and destroying all and every Penobscot Indian. So I painted this, and when I finished painting the document, I wrote in blood red letters diagonally, like a slash, across the document, a word in Penobscot that means "we walk on eternally," to let the viewers know that not only are we still here despite this document, but we will always be here. And for me, this artwork really urges the citizens of Maine not to kind of live in the past and let documents like this define the relationship with Wabanaki people, but to walk hand in hand with us as we all move into the future. The use of language, color, and symbolisms helps to affirm our resilience as Penobscot people historically, presently, and into the future. Thank you. Part of my work at the Penobscot Nation is coordinating our cultural tourism program. This cultural tourism program we call Ways of the Wabanaki is an educational experience and an outdoor experience where clients get to paddle down the Penobscot River, spend a few days on Sugar Island, and then paddle to Indian Island from there and visit our museum. This program, over the last 5 years, we've seen hundreds of clients and educated them all about how Wabanaki people lived, our worldview, share stories, political views. So it's really an enriching program. And we put together a small video along with Little Outdoor Giants, who made the video for us. Here it is. Blue Jay, Didiyaz, Beaver, DeMarquay, Turtle, Dolbe, Eagle, Sawagan, a Penobscot elder once told me that through education comes understanding, and from understanding comes respect.
It's always great to paddle on the Penobscot. Paddling down from Passamaquoddy, you get to paddle the Passamaquoddy rips. The lower section around in the reservation waters, I know it intimately. I can probably name you most of the rocks that you paddle by that most people never even see. We are the people of the river. It means a lot to me to guide on the Penobscot.
Flint knapping is the art of producing stone tools. It's a process of reduction where you're taking a large core of a volcanic rock and producing spearheads, knives, other blades, as well as arrowheads. So during the Paleo-Indian period in Maine, the kin groups were small and they were very nomadic, traveling with the herds of the animals. And as they transition into the Archaic, we're getting into settlements as well as maritime adaptation, adapting to the coast rather than along the ice margins inland. And then as we get into the ceramic and woodland periods, we're looking at agriculture and pottery, hence the ceramic period. But there's a lot of adaptations. The tool styles change, going from large fluted flaked spearheads to a more groundstone technology, and then into what we know today as the bow and arrow.
Weewanigan is the word to carry a canoe. History, like a river trip, has points in time that are challenging and require us to make decisions. So like portaging a canoe around an obstacle in the river, There are certain points in time where we've had to get out of our canoes and stop and make decisions what we carry forward culturally. Who's going to speak the language? Who's going to be the singers? Who's going to weave the baskets? The way that we were able to survive and maintain our dignity and our sovereignty of being able to travel the land and continuing to live the life we wanted to live was to fall back on our traditions. And basket making helped us to do that.
We as Penobscot people have never been forcibly removed from our lands. The same pine tree that I'm looking at right now is a descendant of the pine trees that my ancestors dealt with. And this river has been a key component to our culture always. Ancestors have traveled this river. They've seen the features and named those features, allowing other travelers to follow them as road signs, essentially. Understanding the landscape and those names put there by my ancestors allow us to have a window into the past on how they saw the landscape, how they used the landscape, how they interacted, lived in harmony with, and lived a full, rich life here. To the Penobscot people, the Penobscot River is the heart of our culture.
I'm very excited to introduce Firefly, a Penobscot performing artist. He recently performed at the Kennedy Center and has just released his first album.
We are
If you're ever on the UMaine Orono campus, please stop by the Hudson Museum and visit the museum and all its displays. We'd like to thank you for participating in today's market. We hope to see you in the future, live and in person, next year. Take care.
Hello, I'm Gretchen Faulkner, the director of the Hudson Museum. I want to welcome you to the virtual Wabanaki Winter Market. Last year, when we celebrated our 25th anniversary, I could not have imagined that we would be in this format this year. I'm pleased that you're joining us for this virtual market, and I want to thank our sponsors, Bangor Savings Bank and the Expansion Arts Fund of the Maine Community Foundation. Thank you again for participating in this event.